So, hello everyone. We want to stay on time today, not be behind schedule like yesterday. We have guests who have flights, so I'm going to do my best to be concise so the panel can finish on time. I appreciate Mario's and Roman's comments. I'm just going to make a few remarks, maybe spark some interest. I would agree with what Roman said about empires and nation states. We have to assume that whatever form of government it is, that it is defending basic truths about human beings and things that precede government, things that involve natural justice. So if they don't recognize this, and they can be a force of evil, of course, and we see this through history. On the other side, I would like to say something in defense of my friend Professor Havel when he said that the establishment, the Jewish establishment at the time, 2nd century BC, was very inclined to submit and go along with the wishes of the hegemonic power. And I think this inclination is very deep in human nature and exists today. So the elites, in Croatia included, are very, I would say, detached from the opinions of the average Croats, and they're very much closer and watching and listening, unfortunately, to what opinion makers are claiming in Brussels and elsewhere. I would also like to thank Mario and his comments about Goodhart's book on somewheres and nowheres. I am a avid reader of Christopher Dawson, the great English historian, and Dawson argued that it's not possible to write a history of humanity as such. Humanity cannot be the subject matter of a historian's investigation. Rather, he argued that civilizations or cultures are actually the basic subject matter for a historian's interest. And I think that's very true. He said simply that it was not possible. Toynbee, a great historian, wrote histories of different civilizations and tried to compare them, but that's very different from actually trying to write a civilization of humanity as such from the beginning of time. So I think we do need to make these distinctions. And I also would say that these bureaucracies that arise and seem to last over time do develop their own interests, these individuals employed in these bureaucracies, and a certain kind of mentality, if you will. I have an anecdote for you. At the time of Brexit, I was serving as a foreign policy advisor to the Croatian Prime Minister, Orešković, and we were spending lots of time in Brussels at meetings that would go on until 3 or 4 a.m. That's how decisions are made in Brussels. They last until deep into the evening, until people just lose the will to resist and keep, defending their positions. And then there's a press conference at 5 a.m. and there's an announcement. So that's the way the EU functions, unfortunately. But this gave me the opportunity to spend a lot of time with high-level advisors of prime ministers in the room outside. So let's say the prime ministers are here, we would be in the room next door, and for hours we would have conversations. And I would try to spark conversations with colleagues from other countries on, let's say, more sensitive issues like immigration, like culture, like religion. And these colleagues, even privately, were extremely reluctant to even share their opinions. So they were so secularized, you could even say indoctrinated, that they would not share, they were not willing to share their views with me in a private setting, off the record, not in front of the media, of course. And this is a worrying sign, indeed, a worrying sign that at that level, at the highest level of European government, it's such a secular air that they're breathing, so to speak, that they are no longer able even to have a open conversation on the issues that matter most. That's the problem in Europe. What matters most is not discussed. it's marginalized, it's put to the side, and we have, as a consequence of this, I would say, a deep identity crisis, a deep identity crisis. The next thing I want to say about Europe itself is that we hear about the threats to Europe's future. Some would argue that it's immigration from hostile cultures, that perhaps if it's uncontrolled is certainly a threat. We see what's happening in France, for instance. But I would argue that a bigger threat is actually inside the European Union itself. Bad ideas have obviously bad consequences. There was a great book written by Richard Weaver called Ideas Have Consequences, and this is, I would say, an eternal truth. And when bad ideas are applied over or imposed over a long period of time, they tend to weaken the societies that we live in. And that's what's happening in Europe. We have Marx's ideas were imposed, unfortunately, in places like Croatia and the Czech Republic and Eastern Europe. But Marx, as confused as he was on anthropology and economics, and so still understood what marriage was, that there's a difference between man and woman. Today, we are no longer even able to have a coherent conversation over this. So we have fanatic ideologues who are simply interested in crushing dissent. They're on the left. They don't no longer believe in freedom of speech. We have cancel culture and so on. And we're talking about ideas, if they're imposed on children, for example, at an early age. I would argue this is a form of abuse, and this is happening all through Europe. And politicians aren't even talking about this. They're ignoring the problem, and so. The lesson is that if good people who, I would say, observe and see the obvious do nothing, if they do nothing, then society eventually can even collapse, and finish in chaos, and then politically speaking, nothing good can come of that. Usually people, when they're desperate, look for solutions in the wrong places, unfortunately. And so that's where what we can observe actually happening in this great civilization. We have, beautiful architecture throughout Europe. This was created by a Catholic civilization, a Christian civilization, and the leaders of this civilization today no longer believe in these truths that inspired the art, the literature, and the architecture that was produced over centuries. And so we have a huge problem. This is, at the foundational level, a cultural problem, but it obviously has major implications on politics. And so that's why our center is called the Renewal of Culture. Politics is not enough. Getting into power is not enough. Political victories are encouraging and they're important, but in the end, culture is what matters most. And I think we need to re-emphasize this point over and over again. So those are some brief remarks. Again, this panel has been very stimulating for me. And I thank the speakers for coming to this conference. And I'll give the floor to Lola, and we'll try to stay on time because people are going to be heading to the airport. Thank you.